Good afternoon, everybody. This is just so wonderful to have you all here. I know we have a fair number of people that are joining us virtually as well, but it's fun to see faces and to see so many friends that I haven't seen in quite a while. And so it's really lovely to be here. And I want to welcome you to what's really an incredibly timely conversation about the future of teaching, learning, and discovery at the University of Washington, but in higher ed more generally as well. Again, teaching, learning, and discovery. And the fact that, guess what, they're interrelated. I don't think that I have to tell you, but we're kind of at one of the things about crises is they're also opportunities, and they create the possibilities of real inflection points. And if you have been, reading any articles out there, et cetera, we're at an inflection point in higher education for a whole lot of different reasons. And at this moment, I think that every university, at least anyone where people are awake, are taking stock of what are our unique assets, and what capacity do we have here to tackle the grand challenges? And how do we prepare our students to make an impact in a world that is more dynamic, evolving, and global than probably it's ever been before? I mean, I remember the days we always used to have a plan A and a plan B. Occasionally we had a plan C. Now we need a D, E, and F. And flexibility, which is sometimes not what academia is best known for, is more and more important these days. We really are in the midst of a paradigm shift. And it's not enough to want to make a difference. I know that everybody wants to make a difference, but we really have to make we have to take some meaningful action to reimagine how we can work more effectively to drive the change that we want to see in the world. And I'm really proud of the fact that the College of Arts and Sciences is really helping to lead this conversation through the Rethinking the Academy initiative that we're kicking off with today's event. I love that, rethinking the academy. That's exactly where we need to be. And I'm very grateful to all the leaders in the college for seizing this moment, and especially to the Dean of the college, Dianne Harris, for leading this conversation about the future of higher education. And the launch of this initiative is really an opportunity for our faculty here, online, all over the university, and staff to really work collaboratively on the future of teaching, learning, and research in order to address these grand challenges. I don't have to tell you, any of you that have children of a certain age, and any of you that are working with students, I mean, they know that the challenges out there are existential. They're not just theoretical. This is about their lives. And I think that we really need to partner with them in undertaking this collaborative process of reimagining the academy. It doesn't mean that we don't appreciate tradition. I think that there are certainly aspects of the work that we do that are truly timeless. That special magic that happens between a mentor and their mentee, between a teacher and a student when that aha moment happens. But guess what? It can happen in all kinds of ways, including on Zoom. That's what we're trying to get at here, is what is that balance between that which is timeless that we do not want to lose and that which is timely. And I think that part of what happens too much on the academy is that we tend to pit one against the other. Is it workforce or is it, education for life and democracy? It's both. Is it, basic research? Is it applied research? It's both. And we really need to embrace these contradictions rather than having them, because that's what's so special. If you've read her book, The New Education, then you know that our keynote speaker is on the cutting edge of this transformation that's happening and needs to happen in higher education. If you haven't read her book, do so. It really is worth your time. Cathy Davidson is a leader in efforts to re-envision how we teach and learn to meet the needs of our students and evolving society. which they will enter as graduates. Her book, The New Education, received the 2019 Frederick W. Ness Book Award, and she is the author of numerous other award-winning books, including Now You See It, on the impact of technology and brain science on schools, and The New College Classroom, which I really urge you to read, on transforming classrooms to engage 21st century students. Her work has earned numerous awards, grants, and recognitions from the Guggenheim Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation. She received the 2016, and I know I'm embarrassing you, but nonetheless, the Ernest L. Boyer Award for Significant Contributions to Higher Education, the 2021 Council of Colleges of Arts and Sciences Advocacy Award, and President Obama appointed her to the National Council on the Humanities, and she has twice keynoted the Nobel Prize Committee's Forum on the Future of Learning. She is really, people really recognize the importance of the impact that she's making. And she currently serves as a senior advisor on transformation to the Chancellor of City University of New York, working with 25 campuses, serving over 500,000 students. We think that we're big. She's also the founding director of the Future Initiative, and she's a distinguished professor of English and in the MA in Digital Humanities and Data Analysis and Visualization at the Graduate Center of CUNY. She's also co-founder and co-director of Haystack, which is an 18,000-member international network described as the world's first academic social network. A CUNY Graduate Center president, Robin Garrell, aptly described her as, Cathy is a futurist and a visionary scholar who is committed to transformative student-centered public higher education through innovative initiatives that are preparing our diverse, ambitious, tech-savvy students for extraordinary careers. We've all know that the world is full these days of critics of higher education, many of which can get very sanctimonious and high and mighty. What I love about Cathy is that she's a faculty member first. She loves higher education, and her critiques come from love of students, of faculty, and of trying to make sure that we stay relevant. And she's also a heck of a fun person to hang out with. And it's just really my pleasure to introduce her to you. We are so proud to have her on our campus. Thank you, Dianne, for having her. And we are really proud to have this initiative here. Can't wait to see what we do. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, President Kelsey, for making time to be with us today. I know that there's a faculty senate meeting that President Kelsey is going to have to get to, and a few others of you as well, but I'm really grateful that you could carve out the time to make this introduction and be with us. Yes, we are. I believe we are. And I want to welcome everyone in the room, as well as our online guests. And thank a few people first. I want to thank especially, there's a crew in the back of the room that's made all of this possible. So many, many thanks to Greta Essig, to Juliana Jones, to Isabel Campos, and also to Kevin Mihata, who's been an important thought partner as we've developed the Rethinking the Initiative. So many, many thanks to all of you. And thank you to Cathy for making time to fly across the country and be with us on this day when we ordered this perfect weather for her. It's always like this, I can assure you. So I want to say a few words first about the Rethinking the Academy Initiative. It really starts from my own restlessness about where higher education is today. It comes from my thinking about the challenges we see across institutions of all kinds. But also, as many of you know, I was first trained as a designer. And so rethinking and reimagining and always seeking improvement are probably in my DNA. There's no question in my mind that UW deserves the accolades it has attracted. It's a wonderful, wonderful university. So starting the Rethinking Initiative doesn't come from a place of deficit thinking or thinking about what's wrong, but instead, it really comes from a place of imaginative excitement, of recognizing that we're in an absolutely transformative moment in higher education, whether we want to be or not, we're in it. And it's ours to seize or it's ours to miss out on. It's really, really, really an important moment for us. I think it's a watershed moment. So this is an initiative that is aimed at positive, constructive thinking about a place that we all care very, very deeply about. One of the things I often say about UW that impresses me is that there are faculty here, more so than any place I've been, who've spent decades of investment in this institution. They care about it deeply. It's where they've spent their entire careers trying to make it the best place possible. And that's really where this Rethinking initiative starts. It's an initiative that welcomes your ideas. I hope that you'll be part of it and that you'll give us your feedback. And this is really just the beginning as we launch today. So we're starting, as Anamari said, with one of the world's leading creative higher education thinkers, somebody whose work has influenced me for a very long time, long before I met her in person. And her work has only continued to be more and more exciting, more and more relevant. And it started out being super exciting and relevant. So it's really great having you here with us, Cathy. And I know that you want to start with an exercise. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. It's so great to be here. I mean, perfect day. Cathy Woodward said I really should be an honorary faculty member here. I've been here a lot. Cathy and I started the world's first and oldest academic social network in 2002. We went to a guy in a garage and asked him if he'd help us build this thing called a wiki. And the next year he launched Wikipedia. That was Jimmy Whale. But we had one of our first meetings here when nobody knew what it was before MySpace. Forget Facebook, before MySpace. And now we're going to do a little networking activity. Very easy. There should be a pencil, and it's a color changing pencil. I figure if a pencil can change colors, so can we. It can change. We can too. And a note card. On the blank side of the note card, I want you to take 90 seconds, just off the top of your head. You could change anything about your university tomorrow. Wave a magic wand and change it tomorrow. What would you do? Salaries are off the table. We all know we deserve 10 times more money than we make. So get that off the table. But in terms of ideas, what would you change first? Where would you look first? And this is a 3-part exercise. First part, just take 90 seconds. What would you change first? Where would you begin? That's about 90 seconds. Second part, turn to somebody near you. It works best in pairs, but if there's an extra person, you can do it in 3s. But quite religiously, read what's on your card. The other person doesn't interrupt, and then switch. The reason for this is 20%. Sociologists of education tell us 20% of our students graduate from college never having spoken in a class unless they were directly addressed. So the art of listening, this is a pedagogy technique I use in all my classes. The art of speaking and listening is precious. So just find somebody and read what's on your card and then listen to what, and while they read what's on their card. Again, 90 seconds.
And then we collect the cards.
If you can say, if they want, they can put your name on the card. Okay, I think that's about 90 seconds.
All right, we're going to ask you all to
Okay.
come back together.
Can we have them come back together again, please?
Time's up, folks.
Can I have your attention, please? Can we have your attention, please?
Time's up.
Time's up. Time's up. I think you won. I think it took me 8 times to get you back. That's what learning is, right? If you're doing this in a classroom and you have to fight for your students who are talking about ideas to pay attention to you, you've won, right? This is an exercise called Think, Pair, Share. I learned it from a 2nd grade teacher. When I taught at Duke University, John Chambers, who was the CEO of Cisco, said, would you come to our annual meeting of our top 100 performing CEOs and do Think, Pair, Share with them? He said, because nobody does groupthink more than the top performing 100 CEOs when John Chambers is in the room. I've done this with Bill Clinton in the audience. I did this with 6,000 IB teachers in the Philadelphia 76ers auditorium. That was amazing, seeing everybody think, pair, sharing on the jumbotrons. I've done this with little kids and big kids. It never fails. If you have a class that's sleepy and across the country, people are reporting, students are disaffected and disenchanted, give them the chance to say their ideas to somebody else that's not been graded, low stakes, and creative. I also guarantee, and I don't know if you want to collect these, that there are more ideas here that your dean is going to be able to use than she would ever get in a meeting where 3 people raise their hand. Sociologists of education also tell us those 3 people who raise their hand in class are the ones who are most likely to match their professor in gender, race, income level of their parents, and education level of their parents, right? We're in higher education. 1% of the American population has a PhD. Do you know what percentage of our parents have PhDs? 25%, right? We're in an industry that self-replicates. The way you break that is breaking the patterns of always having attention. We've got so much research on this. Always having the center of attention be the person in the room. And you already did it, right? You did it and your students will do it in the classroom too. And you can do it in any kind of classroom. Calculus, physics. In fact, some of the most avid proponents of this are Eric Mazur, physics professor at Harvard, and somebody I've had the privilege to work on the Nobel Prize forums, Carl Wyman, who won the Nobel Prize in physics in 2011. It's a wonderful book on how universities should teach science. He says, we teach students to hate science. And he does this kind of exercise every single class to get students who love to be physicists. It's interesting. Okay, so thank you for that. In a classroom, what I would do is I would have the students synthesize their 2 different comments. That's where we know from cognitive neuroscience, that's where really the learning is happening. You each write something down. You have some time to write to yourself. It's great for the shy student. Then you talk to somebody else and you explain your idea. You listen to somebody else. Then you synthesize your idea and then present it to the group that's assembled. That's something students will not forget. And yeah, do you want to collect cards?
Let's do it. So we'd love for you to pass your cards to the end. We have some folks who are going to help us. And also, I know you're going to have questions that develop as we speak today. So feel free to write questions on a card and we'll have people who can collect them from you. And if you're online, please post questions in the chat anytime during the event, and we'll be collecting those as well for the Q&A at the end.
Do you want people to sign their cards? Or only if they want to be involved in the initiative?
Voluntarily, they can, whatever you like, up to you. Okay. So with that, I'm going to ask Cathy the first question. Why do universities need to change, and are they capable of changing?
So the second question is easy at University of Washington because, well, let me back up. In January of 2019, people would have said universities can't change. February, the pandemic comes, and your university, your president and your university closed the university down in a week. People would have, that wasn't even a concept before that happened, right? That universities could, 18 million students were online in a week. That's just astonishing. I believe if that can happen, we can change anything, right? That we knew lives were at stake. We knew there was a crisis. We knew we didn't yet know. Remember back then we were washing packages and doing all kinds of wacky stuff that turned out not to be true, but we didn't know. So we did a really smart thing. We said, this is a crisis. We're going to put this crisis first. And we figured out how to do that. It's astonishing. We should be inspired by ourselves, right? And why should we change? That statistic that 1% of the population of the United States has a PhD and 25% of our parents do. If we want to be a self-replicating system, not a problem. If we want to have a different kind of system, maybe there's a little bit of a problem there. Secondarily, students don't know. We've got lots of information on this too. They're not sure what the relationship is between their classes and what they're learning in class and their future lives, right? We know. We've all written mission statements. Right? Someday, put your mission statement next to your syllabus and say, am I really getting to the heart of why I'm in this profession? Is my profession to teach content? Or is my profession also to teach for those students who are not the 3.5% going on for PhDs, to learn methodologies, rigor, creative thinking, how you go from an idea to implementation to an idea, communication, collaboration, skills that are absolutely life-changing, crucial skills that are what we all have learned and what we do as part of our profession. But we rarely articulate that for our students. We also have the Ebbinghaus experiments from the 1880s, also replicated hundreds of times, but how quickly students forget what they learn when they know they're learning for a major event, namely a final exam. Within weeks, you'll forget 75% of what you learned. University of Michigan did this amazing experiment where they gave the same exam to the students who had passed the exam in an advanced psychology class, was a second-year psychology class, 6 months after they took the exam, and students who'd never taken the class. It's about a 6% difference in knowledge level, right? We know that, right? But the kind of meta lessons students learn in a class that have to be articulated, we need to articulate that to yourself and to the students. Those change lives. Those are things, when we have research on that, those are the things we remember for a lifetime.
Yeah.
So yes, we can change. Yes, we have to change. We're at a critical moment. We've inherited a system that was invented between 1860 and 1925. Very little of the infrastructure of our university has changed since 1925. The world has changed a lot since Taylorism, right? A lot since Fordism and Taylorism.
Well, since you mentioned mission statements, in your book, you recommend that readers look up their institution's mission statement to see if we are, quote, doing what we say we do. So here's UW's mission statement. It says, quote, to promote their capacity to make humane and informed decisions, the university fosters an environment in which its students can develop mature and independent judgment and an appreciation of the range and diversity of human achievement. The university cultivates in its students both critical thinking and the effective articulation of that thinking, end quote. So that's our mission statement. I'm wondering about the extent to which we now center and live and enact our values, or if we sometimes may have lost sight of them entirely, or even partially. And if we've done so, how do you think we might recenter those effectively? Because that seems so urgent now.
Yeah, so tomorrow I'm doing a workshop where we'll actually do stuff. Everybody will leave with stuff they've done that they can use to change their syllabus from one-way learning to active learning. So on one level, I love to do that. I love to start with the classroom because I really believe you develop muscles for change. And if you can feel yourself change and change a methodology and find it works, you can then go on and conquer the rest of the university. And there's lots of things. General education courses. Typically, they're kind of, my students call them things like gut courses. Students are dismissive of them. They're often a smorgasbord, and I've looked at the catalog at UW, so I know it is, one sociology class from this column, one arts class, one math class. Such a sad waste of an opportunity for students to get what is absolutely profound foundational thinking for everything they do the rest of the time in college and beyond. How do you connect? Who connects the dots between that one sociology class that happened to be available at 8 in the morning on Tuesdays and you needed it for a credit, and that other class that you had to have at 4 o'clock on Thursdays and it just happened to meet the mat? Who connects those, right?
Yeah.
And do we leave that to the students to connect? What they typically do say, oh yeah, woof, I finally got rid of that gen ed requirement. Now I can go on to my major. What a waste. That's a simple. It's actually structurally not simple at all to make those changes. but it's crucial and it's a foundational place to start.
Okay, I'm going to skip then. I'm going to go to my question specifically about gen ed. We'll keep on this thread. Okay, so we in the College of Arts and Sciences, we have a privilege of offering a very large number of courses that currently fulfill a general education requirement. Many folks in this room teach those courses, and they do it really beautifully. Yeah, as you said, like many institutions, gen ed has kind of exploded here for various reasons over a length of time. And I think that there is institutionally consensus that it requires some revisiting, some rethought. So how would we sit down and rethink general education? How might we redesign it to become a more meaningful part of the college experience? Currently, we in higher ed, we're operating, as you've said, in a fairly antiquated system that's based on, siloed units of departments and disciplines. And we are talking a lot about how we might rethink ourselves to be able to do work, whether it's in the classroom or through research or both, that breaks through those disciplinary silos, that would mean, though, a kind of a reconstituting of the university. We almost, sometimes it feels like, need to take all the puzzle pieces, throw them on the floor, right? And all the toys, and then kind of reimagine them. We want to have an academy that lets us create a diverse, current, socially engaged curriculum, and one that permits us to do the kinds of cross-disciplinary work that we know we need to do, and that I think our students expect and need us to do. But it's when we're kind of in the weeds and doing our work and keeping the wheels turning every day, it can be difficult to step back and find a way to do that. So how would you recommend we think about that? I think it's one of the biggest problems we face.
I'm not sure this would work at Washington. It worked. We did this at the institution I used to be at Duke, and I've helped many, like 5 or 6, more than that, about a dozen institutions do something similar, which is a kind of a pilot general education where the faculty who were willing recreated an alternative.
Mm-hmm.
The one at Duke, we had a nice donor that's called Bass Connections, because the Basses gave us money to do this. And and groups of faculty get together and they come up with a topic that absolutely can't be solved, can't be addressed without many different kinds of expertise, and plan basically an entire general education curriculum that meets all the requirements. So no requirements have to be changed, meets all of the boxes and how many courses and how many credit hours, but on a topic. So for example, climate change. I mean, climate change is everything from religion to science, right? And everything, and art, and everything in between. And these groups of faculty who were kind of bored with what they were doing came together and came up. And I think there's 5 or 6 at Duke. University of Virginia has about 10 going now, and there are other institutions with us. But a pilot group of excited faculty who wanted to try something different piloted this out and then reported back to the faculty and to their departments each year on how it worked. And the students were very much involved and are very much involved in the analysis of the program. And why that's great is, one, you start with the willing, not with the unwilling. No one is kicking and screaming. You ask for volunteers. 2, it turns out to be phenomenally exciting. And you're meeting colleagues often that you've never met before, and in a really interesting way. It gives students an incredible voice and leadership role in a potential for institutional change. And it's how the world works, right? It doesn't mean that every student has to solve climate change. What it means is students go into a general education class thinking, well, I want to be a biology major, and that's part of climate change, but I need to know a little bit more about indigenous ways of seeing the world. Whoa, they have a whole different view than I have in my science lab for what the lab is and what the difference is between I and them, or I and it, and I and the world. How can I learn that? What can I learn from that? How can we all learn to think together? Google did an experiment in 2014, not an experiment. They mashed all the data that they had on who they promoted at Google. And Google at that time only hired engineers and computer scientists. They called themselves a data-driven company. They only cared about data, and they did a personnel experiment about who they promoted and why. Technical competencies didn't even make the top 7. factors in promotion. It was all the things that we know about, general education things, communication, collaboration, ability to think across cultures, taking an idea from something to an idea to implementation. All of those things are what they were looking for in employees. In this kind of syncretic coming together of many things to think about a big problem together, you're doing exactly the kind of thinking you do out in the world where you're working with people from different points of view. The one we also came up with is something I borrowed from Asheshe University in Ghana. At the end of a general education program that they started, they have students write they write a big research paper or do some kind of research paper, but 5 pages are all the questions they heard about during their general education experience that they don't have answers for. And then they do a capstone at the end where one of the things they do is pick up that list of things and think about are those still the relevant questions? Do I have answers? Have I learned anything in 4 years of college? It's an amazing exercise as you're about to graduate to think about all you've learned in the course of those 4 years. But again, it's low stakes in the sense that you're not requiring somebody to do something. It's high stakes in that it's very lofty, right? And it takes the most creative and rigorous minds to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
And people who care. And those are really nice people to have start institutional change. People who care about it enough and are evangelical and also know enough about how institutions work to think about what it would require to empty out departmental siloed structures in order to deal with something in this way. It's a very different way. It's the foundation of a new kind of university.
Well, thinking about that, I mean, thinking about those siloed departments, what do you think is the future of the disciplines? Are we going to be able to, I've talked in my own team often about the decrepitude of the disciplines, right? That we're kind of functioning in these centuries old structures that are becoming, I think, for many folks kind of stifling, and yet many of us still need them and rely on them. They're the way we kind of organize the world. But are they going to have value beyond another short period of time if we need to think differently about the institution and we need to think differently about the problems we're aiming to solve?
So one of the things I like about that method where you take a problem and look at it from many points of view is even when people are bringing their specialized training, you realize that disciplines are a little bit of a fiction, right? I haven't been to an English department meeting since 1998. So that's a confession. Or a brag, I'm not sure which. But I do remember that when I was meeting people just in my discipline, we didn't all get along, right? We didn't all have the same ideas. Disciplines are tremendously constraining, but they're also tremendously flexible. And often generationally, people who come into a field and are the cutting edge of another generation are actually morphing and making changes in a discipline that sometimes people who've been in the profession for a while don't even recognize as their discipline anymore. And then those are the things that start winning all the prizes and getting the notice. And then pretty soon the whole discipline starts to change. So I'm not sure if disciplines are useful. I'm not sure if disciplines are holding us back, or I'm not sure if the concept of a discipline is not, I mean, it sounds very Foucauldian, but isn't disciplining our idea of discipline more actually than in real life and practice we engage in. Right? And again, that whole general education, looking at problems or teaching with somebody totally different. I one time had an idea that 25% of every course, we didn't do this, 25% of all of our courses should be faculty picking a name out of the hat and then having to figure out a class they taught with that person. It would be kind of amazing.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
I think we'd all be happy. I really think it would be a quite astonishing thing. But it's also a way of saying that we have ways of transcending disciplines and making connections. And often the infrastructure that Charles Eliot, the author of The New Education, invented is the thing that keeps disciplines looking more static than they actually are. Although there's also our professional associations, although I think they tend to change more than our actual departments do, right? The fact that we live so long in the neighborhood of a department often makes us more boring than we actually are out in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, sometimes our departmental self is much the least interesting part of ourselves. I see a lot of head shaking. Yeah, right. Anyone who's ever written a grant, Anna Mari and I were talking about this. When you write a grant, they don't let you just talk about your discipline. You have to talk about how it's going to change the world, what its significance is, et cetera, et cetera. We don't do that very much actually in our classrooms or even when we think about ourselves as intellectuals.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And you know, you mentioned a couple of really key words there, thinking about, as we think about sort of, you know, lifting off, thinking about the institutional change that we're aiming to do in this rethinking initiative. Infrastructure is a word that you mentioned, and the structures that kind of have held us together in the academy and sometimes torn us apart. And one of the big ones is thinking about our reward systems and promotion and tenure in particular. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the messages we give faculty about what we value based on our metrics for promotion and tenure, based on the ways we think about that whole process. You know, what barriers, and maybe some of them are disciplinary, certainly some of them are, right? There are just very clear disciplinary dictates in those processes. But what barriers does the current faculty reward system create to institutional change, the kind of institutional change that we're aiming to think about in this initiative? And how might we rethink some of those as part of our effort to rethink the academy and thinking about them too, and very much with an eye toward thinking about the values we want to enact, the university we want to be.
So this has become something of a motto of the institution I built at CUNY, the Futures Initiative, that you can't change structural inequality with goodwill. You need to make new structures with equality at the core. And I think that's true about institutional change. You can't say to people, we're not going to change the infrastructure, we're not going to change the reward system, we're not going to change recognition system, and you have to change the university, right? You're a chump, right? We all know what the reward system of the university is. Research, and that can be university press book, peer-reviewed monographs, and the top citation count. Then teaching, service. We know how badly our world teaches service workers, right?
Out in the world.
Out in the world, yes. And service worker out in the world, and service workers, people who do service at the institution, right? So I've often thought that we should have 2 out of 3 tenure, 2 out of 3 recognition policies where somebody can do the equivalent of contract grading as a professor. Say something like, I just wrote a big book and I would like to concentrate for the next 5 years on institution building. But I want that institution building to count in the same way that the book I wrote the last 5 years will count. And have a contract that says, I plan to do this, this, and this. And I want to be rewarded and recognized for doing this, this, and this. And it would be an alternative version to the inverted triangle of what we're doing now. I don't know that that's going to happen. But even thinking in those terms, I think it reminds us that without a reward structure that works, things don't change, right? Carl Wyman, who's I talked about this. I was talking about it with other people this morning. Have I mentioned Carl Wyman yet?
I think briefly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Carl Wyman, I had the privilege to be on the Nobel Prize forum of Future of Learning forums with him. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2011. He says the way we teach science makes people hate science. Did I talk about that already?
Yeah.
No, I did talk about
Yeah.
that. Okay. I've had several conversations where we've talked about this morning. That won't change. The way we teach science isn't going to change until the grade structure changes everything else. Similarly, our structures of curriculum and how we build our institution can't change unless we change our reward structures for faculty.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
Well, one of the things that I'm excited about, here's a shameless plug, is that the second part of the Rethinking initiative has to do with an event that's coming up at the end of this month, which is bringing a group called Humetrics to campus. If there are faculty members here who would be interested in participating in a future Humetrics workshop, please sign up on our website, on the Rethinking the Academy website, and we'll be in touch when we hold that next workshop. And there's QR codes on the cards that are on your seats, so that'll take you to that website so you can easily get to it. But the metrics group is really about bringing together kind of, again, a coalition of the willing to really think about our values and reward systems and kind of recenter what we really care about in the university and bring us closer to thinking about those beautiful words in our mission statement and having us really enact our values and put them back at the center of everything we do. And I think that also for me is related to bringing us back to the joy in the work. There's a lot in our lives in universities that can move us away from that joy. And I think it's actually really, really important. It sounds a little bit hokey, but I think it's super, super important to find all the ways we can to recenter that joy. For me, it sometimes just comes from reading about the incredible work you all are doing when I read the news and see the incredible achievements and accomplishments, or just learning about things you're doing in your classrooms or with your research, or the institution building that you talked about. And I think this idea of sort of flipping the idea of service and thinking about what it really is in the university context, which is institution building, right? When you serve on committees, when you serve as a chair, such important work. This is actually institution building work that needs to be recognized.
I actually think we should get rid of the word service entirely and call it institution building, institutional leadership, a totally different, change the whole value that's associated with it.
Yep. Okay, I agree completely. That's such, I love that.
That one's
in your
easy.
book. I
That
love
one's
that.
easy to do.
I love that. One of the things you talk about in the book, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I know we want to have time for plenty of questions. In the book, you talk about the need to refund higher education, public higher education. And I mean, everyone is going to be like, yes, we need that so much. I grew up in California when the public schools, I was so fortunate to be there at a time when they were the best in the country. They're now, that kind of flipped. I think at one point, the scholar George Lipsitz writes about the fact that California was top and Mississippi was bottom, and that after Proposition 13 firmly took hold, that reversed completely. And it's heartbreaking. It's just hard. Not that Mississippi should have ever been at the bottom either, right? But that, we've got to have a good level set. That was Prop 13, for those of you who don't know, was a major tax reform bill that passed in California in the early 1970s. And it took some decades to really erode the entire public education system there. And it finally kind of reached the top and got, started taking the heart out of the University of California system as well. And really, over the past 3 or 4 decades, that's happened sort of systematically across the nation. Really taking apart what are one of the great national treasures of this country, which are these public research universities that really deserve our deep respect and admiration and support. And we all know that, and we all work for that. And we know that many of our state legislators would agree with that, and that they have huge numbers of competing interests for their resources, right? But, for all of us, this is one of the most truly, truly pressing issues. You feel it at CUNY in a way that's even exponentially more pronounced than we do. What do we do if it doesn't get refunded, and what should we be doing to help it get refunded?
Well, I think now it's 3 states have returned per capita funding of higher education to the pre-2008 levels. 3, other things have come back. 3 states for education. Needless to say, we have to change that, so there has to, California did last year have a new voter initiative that did put some money back into the system. But it's ideological, and the assaults on public education, on all higher education now, more laws passed and rulings passed last year that involved censorship than were under any 1 year under McCarthyism. Right. So we're definitely in a situation of constant assault right now, intellectual and financial. How you change that, get out and vote, write to your Congress people, all that stuff. This is representative democracy at work or not at work right now. This is not an accident that this happened. This is a very strategic idea that public education shouldn't be funded, that we have too many people in college, and too many people are getting educated. So this is something that we don't have control over, but we can all wish, and we can work on it, and we can work for that and work for that.
Yeah, one of the things that I think so many people here, I know here at the university, are concerned about the polls that have been coming out. Gallup's run them, Pew's run them, others have run them, that show the public's a steady decline in the public's faith in higher education. It skews depending on political party affiliation pretty dramatically, and it's complicated, right? Because We know that some of those same Republicans who say they don't have faith in higher education are desperate to get their kids into certain colleges, right?
Yes.
So there's something going on there. But one of the things that I think has been a response at some public universities to try to bring the public's faith back and to refund the university has been, to some extent, to put a kind of specific emphasis on the classroom, right? And what we're teaching and how we're teaching it. And I wondered, you begin your book with the predicament of Charles William Eliot, a Harvard graduate who planned to live off of family wealth while he was pursuing a low-paying career in science. And in the midst of that plan, there was a financial market collapse worldwide, and he had to change course. So he graduated in 1853 and went on to create, basically, as you demonstrate and others have, the modern research university. And he, in his essays critiquing higher education, he begins with a father pondering his son's college education and wondering, what can I do with my boy? Now, aside from importantly adjusting for more inclusive language, what should that question be today? I mean, what inspired you to name your book after Eliot's essay? There are lots of options for what you could have named your book. Was it about recentering education as a kind of a political project? How would we rethink, what can I do with my child, with my student? Where does that fit in this bigger sort of political project? And why look back to 1853 for the title of your book?
Well, the title, if any of you are my Facebook friends, we went through hundreds of titles that we rejected. And then my editor said, you talk about the new education so much, why don't you call your book The New Education? I was like, no, we're not calling my book The New Education. But I thought, what a great idea to just call it The New Education. Titles aren't copyrighted. And to make the reference overt. Because Charles Eliot was president of Harvard for 40 years. When the family lost their money, he had a grandparent who gave him enough money to go to Europe for 2 years, and he went to France and Germany and studied the educational systems there, came back, and was also totally caught up in the new world of Fordism and Taylorism. And the question, what can I do with my boy, is because Harvard at that time was training people to be ministers. Only 10% of Harvard students were going on to be ministers. A little bit like 3.5% of our students going on being PhDs. And our curriculum is still geared to, implicitly or explicitly, training people who are going to be future tenure track professors, right? So Eliot actually hired major industrialists to create the infrastructure of our school. So the Carnegie credit hour, seat time, is invented when Eliot hires a Philadelphia engineer to align college thinking with Fordism, with Taylorism, explicitly Taylorist, how we can measure the output and the hours that somebody spends in class. That's not going to work now. Right? I mean, that's not what students care about now, and not what anyone cares about now. I believe that being more overt about the actual intentions behind higher education, more concerned about learning and curiosity and creativity, less concerned about what we think of as disciplines, is actually a great way of making people believe again in higher education. There's a wonderful organization called the National Association of Colleges and Employers that does really great work in making the bridge from the classroom to careers, from the classroom to what I like to call world readiness, whatever that is, beyond college. And I think that we're giving ourselves more credit, thinking more about our capacity to actually make a difference. So we know from 1880, not 1980, 1880 to the present, we know we forget things after an exam. What we don't forget is those things that we absorb and adapt and that are meaningful to ourselves. We change them a lot. We often credit, from my favorite professor, I learned something I'll never forget, and it might not be anything at all like that. Doesn't matter. What matters is that sense that we have a legacy and an inheritance, and we invested our time and we learned something that is meaningful for the rest of our lives. And we all know that. That's common sense, not what the grade is on your final exam.
Absolutely. I think do I have time for one more question, Greta? I have 5 more minutes. Okay, perfect. One more question. And so I'm going to circle back then to the book's title and in much of its focus. That, you know, the new edition of the book includes the 10 points for kind of transforming the university. But the core of the book is about the new education. It's about what we do in the classroom. And of course, and I'll just wave this around for a second, because this is also a super important book, her newest book, The New College Classroom, which I highly recommend as well. So let me just ask about teaching. And I want to preface this question by saying how enormously proud I am to be at an institution that includes so many innovative teachers, faculty who are bringing truly leading edge research into their classrooms every day, and who are constantly seeking new ways to best engage with their students. Yet we also know that despite, you know, myriad studies about how students learn, you've incorporated so many of them, you've been a leading thinker in so many of those, many instructors teach the same way we were taught. And I know that and I've said this many times, I've wanted a do-over for so many years because I did not know how to really be a good teacher when I got out of graduate school. And I, for many years, taught a required large lecture course that had, you know, it's not huge, it was about 100 students required. It also filled a bunch of gen ed requirements. And I look back on that and think, oh my God, there was so much I didn't know, right? So much I didn't know. And I really wish I could do it over and do it better. And we don't actually tend in most PhD programs to teach our students how to teach. We give them TA assignments and they absorb whatever we're doing, but there's not a lot of time for the most part spent on pedagogy. So how can we encourage incorporation of better teaching methods into classrooms and help faculty who might be struggling as I was, especially now when so much has changed because of the pandemic and a huge range of societal challenges that we're facing as a consequence. I mean, I think we are in a whole new level of needing to figure out how to teach again for so many of us because of the pandemic. So I'd love to hear you talk about that.
So there's so many ways to talk about this. One, Charles Eliot makes the first school of education in America and went back and read the indenture for that school of education. Only for K through 12. Must not teach college people how to teach college. Why? Because a job of a student in college is to replicate their teacher. To replicate their research advisor and their mentor. You don't want them to learn good at other methods. However your teacher teaches is how you're supposed to be teaching. That's your professor. However your professor. So you're not allowed to have college students in the School of Education. And to this day, most School of Educations are for K through 12 teaching. That's weird, right? I mean, that's an infrastructure issue. It's also values. We don't, because we also don't value teaching as much as we value other things. We also, everyone I know spends so much time on teaching methods that don't work, right? I mean, there are over 1,000 studies. This is Carl Wyman again, over 1,000 studies of active learning. In 2014, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, a group of scientists looked at over 225 rigorous studies of learning, teaching and learning, every method possible for evaluating their success. And their conclusion was if it had been a pharmaceutical study, traditional learning would be taken off the market. Unequivocal, boom, right? They did a follow-up study for race and gender, same result. The most resistant, this came from students at MIT, was students saying, hey, this active learning stuff, I'm not learning as much. They then went and had the students read all the studies, and suddenly the same students thought they'd learned tons, right? But the students are part of the same educational system that we are, right? If it's not a boring lecture, even a great lecturer, I'm not going to be so one-sided. If it's a lecturer who's reading a lecture and you're taking notes and then you get an A on the exam, that's what we think of as college. Mm-hmm. Sure isn't learning. We know it's not learning. We know that. Right? Jonathan Stern's a friend of mine who teaches at McGill University. He's a science studies, disability studies, sound studies person. Mm-hmm. He himself had throat cancer and invented a special voice mechanism that he talks through in his classes. He actually gotten his voice back. And he has a wonderful blog called Superbun, where he traces and does documentation and collects data on his students. When he teaches 600 students in a class, he does amazing things, simple things like note cards and pencils. We'll ask them a question at the end to answer at the end of a class. 600 students, he can't turn that into discussion, but he can ask them a question. The one that I got to witness is, this is a media studies class. What's one thing we talked about in class today that you're still going to be thinking about when you go to bed at night? And if there isn't something, what should we be talking about in class that'll keep you awake at night? Right? That simple intervention in a lecture class has changed grades, attendance, people wanting to major in the field, wanting to work with him. It's so tiny. One of the things we did in the New College Classroom, one of our reviews called it an installation guide for the new education, because we said, this thing will take 5 minutes of preparation and it has results. Like these note cards, everywhere I go, I bring note cards. It works. Giving students the chance to say what they're thinking works. It makes the teaching palpable. When they exchange ideas, the synthesis part, that is where learning happens, that is learning. It doesn't take a lot, but in this new book on the New College Classroom, we divided into three parts: changing ourselves, changing our classrooms, changing the world. And needless to say, the hardest one is the first one. Because if you're in this room, you've succeeded by a system that reifies your success and your methods of success, that reified that of a previous generation and a previous generation and a previous generation. After I wrote the New College Classroom, I got a letter from somebody at Harvard who said, how come you didn't talk more about Charles Eliot being a eugenicist? And I said, to be honest, I talk a lot about Galton, who invented the bell curve, being a eugenicist. I didn't really know very much. Turns out Charles Eliot's eugenics papers are kind of away from the other papers at Harvard. And then this person who started writing about it and I started corresponding, when he leaves Harvard after 40 years, it's to become vice president of the International Eugenics Association. He was the spokesperson for the only truly eugenics law in the United States, right? In Indiana, they had a law passed. It was then rescinded by the Supreme Court for sterilizing people with lesser intelligence. People who have mental disabilities, but needless to say, race and gender and class are all through it. As I said, it was rescinded very quickly, but Eliot was a spokesperson for that. Those are values that we have cooked into an infrastructure that we've inherited. And it starts in our classrooms, but even more, it starts with us thinking about, what do we want? What do we want for our boy?
What do we want? So with that, what a great question to open up to the audience with. Cathy, this has just been extraordinary talking with you. So thank you. And I want to now ask everyone, if you have a question, write it down on a card, and we've got folks who will collect the cards. And we also, for those of you online, don't forget to post your questions in the chat, and we'll start some Q&A. So we might need just a second to get organized here with that. But this has been really terrific, and I thank you for this wonderful, wonderful dialogue. Greta may be able to read something out already, or someone will with a mic from what's online. We'll get rolling here. Thank you.
Hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. I've got first a question from the online chat. In colleges and universities, students complete a series of courses over several years, and then voila, they graduate with a degree in a given area. Is the whole idea of chopping up content into a series of courses outmoded? Is the whole idea of structuring learning through courses outdated?
There are courses and there are courses. And I know that sounds evasive, but I don't, there has to be some structure. What a course is another one. It's like a discipline, right? The most exciting class I ever taught was when I first came to CUNY from Duke, and I got way more fanfare than I deserved. And I was, so a lot of attention. I team taught with the former president of the Graduate Center, who was the acting chancellor. And we handpicked 15 graduate students who were all in different fields, from computer science to audiology to English, art history, There's a dancer in the class. And they all had to be teaching undergrads. And we would read theory, and then they would try to turn it into something for the undergrads who would give us feedback in situ on what we were doing. And the students came up with the undergraduates came up with the most astonishing projects for their classes. That was a course, but it wasn't really a course. It was a different concept. So I'm not sure, to answer that question, I'm not sure about that the infrastructure of courses has to change. I would change it if I could, but that seems like a bigger project. But what one does within the confines of an infrastructure of, say, 4 hours a week over 12 semesters, are you quarter still?
Quarters.
So is it 12 weeks?
10.
10? Oh my God. I remember the days, the 10-week quarter. Wow. You can do amazing things. One of our classes in Brooklyn, in our history class, decided they wanted to become docents and bring to a university 5 people who had never been, bring to the art museum 5 people who had never been in a museum. It was amazing. Happened to be a Kehinde Wiley exhibit, and first of all, they made handbills in Portuguese, Mandarin, Korean, Spanish, Arabic, all over Brooklyn. And they would meet people there. The one thing they could get in free if they'd never been into a museum before, it was mostly immigrant grandparents who couldn't believe you could go into that building, right? And the Brooklyn Museum was great, and CUNY students can go in free anyway because they're public university. They let anyone that was with the students go in free. It was incredible. The only thing that I regret is I wasn't allowed to take photos because so many of the people that came in were undocumented or immigrants and were terrified about the idea of pictures. So we didn't take pictures. But it was mostly grannies who felt so proud of these young people taking them into a museum. Needless to say, the students, that's a course, but it's also transformative on every level, right? And they learned more about art in a contemporary art class because of that purpose. The computer scientists made an app that this was in 2016, still being used at Columbia. I found out just at a party I went to recently, called Jailbreak My Life. One of the students was an incarcerated person, and they were talking about user design. And he said the hardest thing about getting out of prison was, in prison, everything was scheduled. Suddenly you're in this world where you have to meet with a parole officer and a counselor, and you don't know the train schedules. And they made an app that allowed somebody to put in all of their schedule and the MTAs and how long it would take. And it's still being used now. And they won the citywide contest. It was a great story. But, it was about programming, user design, sociology, empathy, right? I mean, that's a course, but it's not a course. So, that's a very ambiguous, but not an ambiguous sense.
That's great.
We have to think bigger.
Thank
Within
you.
any infrastructure, we have to think bigger.
All right, I've got another for you. What is the next step for those of us using active learning already?
Tell your friends. Write your congressman, tell your friends, write about it, write about your successes, have your students write about their successes. Something I've been doing lately is having students write back to learning outcomes, take learning outcomes and then write their own. That's been one of the most inspiring things in the class. And then have students talk about that with other students. It's a great way in this moment of huge disillusionment with higher education. The students find their own heart. And so if you're doing active learning already, great, and be even bolder. Try something else and bring a friend.
Can I
Team teach with somebody who's never done active learning before.
Can I throw something in there? Can you talk a little bit about ungrading?
Sure. So ungrading is one of those words that's so friggin' scary, right? And ungrading can mean anything from good peer evaluation and peer review to self-reflection, to actually not giving grades until you have to in the final, on your final exam, on the final grade. I've done so many different versions. I've done contract grading, which is one version of ungrading. I've done badging, where students do group projects and come up with a peer system of all the different things that count in a successful project, having a sense of humor. In my computer tech world, being the fire starter, the one who may not be so good at finishing, but who comes up with the brilliant idea. And then the finisher, the person who says, this is due at midnight. We're going to cut out parts 4 and 5, and we're just going to put this together, and we're going to have a final project, and we're going to deliver it by midnight. These are incredible skills in addition to other kinds of skills. When I did that version of peer badging, I would have students with the nice thing about badging is you never give a low grade. You just give a badge if somebody does something great, something you admire, right? In one of my classes, students worked in groups, and the first part of the group was to give badges out to anyone who'd contributed that week to the group. You don't have to tell somebody who doesn't get a badge that they're not holding up their own, right? I run my groups the way I do when I used to be. I helped create Duke Corporate Ed when I was at Duke, and I did a lot of executive training. And I run it the same way, where everyone has a job description, everyone sets up a timeline for themselves. That's another version of ungrading, or the unsyllabus, where you have a syllabus and you let students figure out when they're going to turn their papers in. Or you give them a week, so let them choose what time in the week they're going to turn it in. It's easier on you, and it's a lot easier on them, because what often happens is to the student is they're not being graded on their intelligence or their work. They're being graded on how well they are at dealing with 4 final exams on the same day and 4 papers due that week, right? As opposed to letting them intelligently and maturely figuring out when they're going to be able to make their semester work. Carl Wyman again does this thing with his flipped classroom, where when students come into the flipped classroom, he has them give an answer to some physics test. And if they get it wrong, they then work until they finally get the correct answer. For the next, he has them keep a little notebook. Did I talk about that already?
No, I don't
here?
think so.
No.
No.
I've been talking to people all morning about these things. I can't remember who I did. He has them keep a little notebook of what they got wrong and why. And for the next assignment, they go to their notebook, and before they look at the next assignment, they analyze their own process of getting it wrong and what it took to get it right. Then they answer it again. So there's a constant self-feedback loop. Sarah Schendel, who teaches at Suffolk Law School, does a similar thing with her law students, which is really interesting. Conventional law exam. Then at the end, students write, it's required, but she doesn't grade it, how many hours they spent studying for the exam and what grade they're going to get. When she turns back the exam, the first thing she has people look at those. If you studied 15 hours and you got an A+, you don't have to spend 15 hours next time. If you spent 4 hours and you got a C, maybe you learned something about yourself. That's another example about a simple thing that you can do that makes grading not an end in itself, but a process of learning about yourself and learning how to improve yourself, learning how to learn.
Great. Thank you. What's next?
The famous Jonathan Stern does my favorite ungrading thing. He teaches 600 students, so he gives ABCD exams at the end of the year. He knows that those are stupid. He's done all the research on it. So he lets people come into class with a crib sheet. And he's an artist, so he does a different, one time it's an index card you can write on both sides. One time it's an 8.5 by an 11-inch paper. He always has some rule, and they have to sign it, and students get credit for both the crib sheet. You can get up to 5 points extra for the crib sheet and the final exam. What he knows is where students learn. It's not about the ABCDs. What they're learning is synthesizing a whole semester into this one piece of paper. It's incredible. That's simple. So that's working within a structure, working with a very limited system, and doing something brilliant. He also has done amazing art exhibits of the crib sheet. And it's fascinating. Some people draw. Some people like me, you know this, I couldn't have done this today if I hadn't. I always have one crib sheet I bring, and I forgot it. And so you printed it out for me, and it's the list of all the things Charles Eliot invented. And it's the list of all the professional associations that were made between 1865 and 1910. I never looked at it. I don't think I really talked about that much today, but I need that. So that's something I know about myself. Students need to learn those things about themselves. If we control everything they do and don't vary it, they don't learn those things that are life-saving and life-changing for them. So ungrading is basically getting rid of outputs and thinking about feedback and assessment, true assessment.
Thanks.
Can you hear me? Oh, we got a few questions.
Here's my little crib sheet, just if you want to see it. I can read it if you want.
So we received a few questions related to university governance. So I'm just going to read one of them to. All right, from a rank and file faculty member's perspective, it feels difficult to affect the institutional change you advocate.
What?
The administration seemingly has virtually all the power in our shared governance, with the unilateral ability to kill, financially starve, or renege on agreements with faculty.
I think the administration is shutting off your mic.
How might faculty members achieve genuine shared governance on behalf of our students and other stakeholders?
You know, I do a lot of that kind of work, but I spend weeks learning the structures of universities and interviewing people before I comment, because every university is different. My pet peeve is somebody was your friend yesterday, they were your colleague yesterday, then they become a department chair and they're suddenly the administration. I think that can become a self-defeating prophecy. And in fact, it's a way of imposing, of talking about shared governance, but imposing you're losing your own agency. So I feel like I'm not, because I have not done that here. I've not interviewed anyone about governance. I don't know anything about your governance structures. So I would feel like about that which one does not know, one should not speak. I think that's Wittgenstein. Is that right? Is that Wittgenstein? I went way back.
Do we have more?
And I don't mean that as a cop-out. It means that I take that very, very, very seriously. And I do this at institutions, but I haven't done that here. So I just don't feel like I could jump into that one.
That seems
And be
very fair.
helpful.
That seems very fair. Yeah.
Like this. Oh, we have a great many more questions. All right. Could you share how to better center DEI, justice and access in our institutional structures?
Oh, read Bettina Love, read Chavez, the anti-racist writing workshop. There's so many smarter than me people out there who have different ways. I don't like the word inclusion. Angela Davis says this smart thing that once we start talking about diversity and inclusion, it was no longer about changing the system. It was about getting people to conform more towards a certain kind of standard. So one thing we know about active learning is students of color, minoritized students often thrive in situations where the world is not just for the 3 students who most are like the teacher. But I highly recommend Bettina Love's book, which I'm not going to remember the name of. Tomorrow I'll remember it because it's on a slide. And Rose Marie, can anyone help me out here? Do you know who wrote the anti-racist writing workshop? Does anyone know that book? It's a wonderful book with a number of methods for how you do anti-racist teaching. Tomorrow I'll be talking about a number of methods I use in my classrooms to make sure everyone speaks. There's one, I can just do a sneak preview. One I like to do with popsicle sticks, where everybody in the classroom gets 2 popsicle sticks. And they can talk until they don't have any more popsicle sticks. Why you do that is because sociologists of education have told us the people most likely to talk are the ones that most resemble you. This means everybody talks the same amount. And if someone doesn't use their top popsicle sticks, then you as a teacher can say, why didn't you? Right. Also, it's really interesting. If somebody knows they only get to talk twice in a class, they think differently and talk in a different way. Right. But it really changes the whole dynamic in the room and who's allowed to speak. 20% figure about speaking out also goes for about 20% of students no, I'm going to get that wrong. I'm going to get the statistic wrong. I'm going to just leave that. Go for another question.
We got a few questions on this topic. Do you have any advice for undergraduates who want to diversify their education and learn beyond the classroom, but feel overwhelmed by coursework and institutional requirements?
You know, I'm a huge advocate of experiential learning, internships, apprenticeships, but universities are overwhelming. You know, I think making all the requirements that we have in universities, all the requirements for our majors. I wish, if we're going to do this, I wish every department was required to have minimum one class less required. Be an interesting start. And then do something really interesting with that one other class. But I do think that universities, how do I say this? As much creativity as can happen in a classroom, the infrastructure of our universities just looks boring, right? I mean, who willingly, as an adult, would want to pay money to be in a system with as many fidgety, dull little rules as we have in university? Really? You know, if I'm going to go to a book club, I'd be running out the door if it said, oh, and from 9 to 10, we're going to do this. And on Tuesdays, we're going to do this, right? What we do in our spare time and out of love, we wouldn't want that system. Right? So I think I would tell the student to come to my office so we could commiserate, because I don't like it either. You know, I really feel that way. And I mean, I think a lot of times when we think commonsensically about what we would do, same with active learning. Who learns tennis from a lecture, right? You might watch it on YouTube, but you're going to be out there practicing and you're going to see what you're doing wrong and go to somebody who does it a little better for some pointers, and then you're going to try it, right? I mean, duh, right? Most of the things about changing university are about common sense. And I think our infrastructures are incredibly painful, detailed, da, 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 da. You have to take these 3 courses, and then when you finish the sequence, you take that class. That's the opposite of learning.
As we get ready for this question, we probably have time for 1 or 2 more. But I just want to remind you all that we do have a reception afterwards. And a little like the Wizard of Oz, you unlike Wizard of Oz, you can look behind the curtain. That's where we'll be, just on the other side of the black curtains there. So just stay with us, and we'll enjoy some time afterwards and time for more questions with Cathy. But go ahead, Greta.
So we got a comment in the chat. David Sosha wanted to let you know that Felicia Rose Chavez wrote
Thank
the
you.
anti-racist writing workshop.
Thank you.
People in the chat.
It's
have
a lovely book. It's really a marvelous book. She does, if you ever want to invite somebody who does a fantastic workshop, she does a really great, really terrific workshop.
All right, next question. As a millennial professor who has been trained in an institutional context where pedagogy seminars were required and seeking support from the Teaching and Learning Center was encouraged, I continue to struggle with student engagement. What have you learned from students about what motivates them to engage with a course, to participate in learning activities and course materials, et cetera?
So again, this is one where I would love to sit down with this person and really talk about what they're doing and how they're doing it in the classroom. I have had just tremendous success with things that ask students. So here's something I love to do on the first day of class. I love students to talk, because I do collaborative project-based learning, and I do have students help. I leave one syllabus thing blank in every class and have students work together in groups and pitch to the class what we're going to do in that one thing. I've never had students fail me in that. And they come up with so many more interesting ones. Probably 4 or 5 years ago, my students wanted us to read somebody who's actually a friend of mine, Tressie McMillan Cotton's book, Thick. And they chose that for the syllabus. And then she won a MacArthur. Whoa, they were like, they thought they took full credit, 100% full credit. You know, so that's a simple one for student engagement. Leave just one week blank and let the students figure it out and pitch to each other about why they want to do X during that week. There are many ways to engage students. These silly note cards work. Or the equivalent of that, of some equivalent where letting students have, so what I was starting to say earlier, I have students on the first day of class tell us 3 superpowers that have nothing to do with the class, but that we may need if like the power goes out or we have another hurricane or something. And it's fantastic. I mean, you know, someone's a magician. Somebody else was prima ballerina at the Houston Ballet. Somebody else, you know, there's always some exciting and interesting thing. And it means that we respect not just the content of the class, but the whole person. And it brings a whole different level of engagement in the classroom. Even if we leave that on the floor and don't actually go back to that and use it again. Although often we do go back and use those skills again.
I would say probably the last question, yeah, given the time. I'm watching your watch.
Oh, you're watching.
Yeah, this will be the last question. It's a good one. Regarding teaching methods that don't work, isn't a lot of that problem linked to grades? I.e., we structure,
Could you say that again? Is a lot,
isn't a lot of that problem linked to grades? We structure our classes in ways that give us quantitative evidence for their progress and their grade.
answer? Yes.
That's
A
right.
lot is about grades. The other thing about teaching fails is often if I have a total teaching fail, the question I ask on the index card is, wow, that was a terrible class. What should be done different today? And is there anyone who would like to take the lead next class and run the class? I always get engagement. And it also says, I'm not the only one in this room, right? That sometimes teaching fails are my fault, sometimes they're your fault, and sometimes it's because the world sucks.
No, it
Right?
also
A lot of times.
And it shows that there's a community responsibility. on that.
Absolutely.
It's not one person's responsibility.
Absolutely, it's a shared responsibility.
Mhm.
But we don't often share that responsibility. And the problem with grades is it's the one thing that is not a shared responsibility,
Mhm.
right?
That's right.
It says you're gonna, that I'm gonna say what your grade is in this class. I mean, it's shared in the sense that, did you study? Didn't you study? Are you good at taking tests? All that. But ultimately, it's something finite. And I think like the biggest teaching fail is when you spend hours and hours writing comments on student papers and leave them outside the door and the students never pick them up.
Yeah.
Who hasn't had some version of that,
Mhm.
right? That's stupid, right? That's a total waste of everybody's time. And it's demoralizing for you, and it doesn't help the students.
Cathy, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. You've done a great job of getting out.
And thank you all for being here.
Thank
I
you
mean,
all.
there's a million things you all could be doing. That you're here is really impressive.
Well, and I think this kind of conversation is a start of what I hope will be many more as we continue to rethink our work together. And we'll be looking for many more opportunities and hope that you'll continue to join in the conversation and be part of this, again, our own kind of classroom of shared responsibility for making our work and our institution as good as it can possibly be. So thank you all so much for being here. And please do join us. Tomorrow, Cathy's doing her workshop that's based on the new college classroom. So if that interests you, we hope that you'll join her there and check out the book. And we'd love to see you on the other side of the curtain for some refreshments. So thank you all so much.